Okay, we're back with Ken and Mike for another installment of My Uncle's Escaped Alcatraz. Last week we covered a lot of territory, and we covered the trial, the bank robbery, the trial, and now we're at the point in their story where they go to prison for the bank robbery. So, Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about who went where and what was going on there?
Well, there were the three brothers, Alfred, Clarence, and John. And like Ken mentioned in the previous episode, he distributed them equally to three different federal prisons. Alfred went to Atlanta, Clarence went straight to Leavenworth, and John went to Lewisburg.
Okay. And then what was the idea? They wanted to keep these guys separate at all times.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously you put them together and there's nothing but trouble as a result. So the judge wisely recognized if you separate them, they're less likely to break out and cause difficulties.
Yeah. And then, Ken, what was going through the family's eyes and the brothers' eyes when all this happened? I'm sure it was a very tumultuous time. I mean, they were in the paper, and then they got tried, and then they got convicted, and then they got put in prison. I know they were used to these guys getting in trouble and thrown in the slammer, but it looked like this was pretty high profile. And what was going on with your family then?
Well, I believe my grandmother and grandfather just could not understand how they would separate the three brothers. If they had kept all three in Atlanta, it would have been possible for my grandmother and grandfather and most of the family members to have visited them. Separating them probably added fuel to the fire as far as their ability and wanting to get out. Alfred never did. So I almost kind of think if they had left all three together in Atlanta, Alfred might have kept them from trying to even attempt an escape. But the fact that they broke them up and sent them to other locations, I think it was just another knife they were sticking in the back of my grandmother and grandfather. It was, okay, yeah, we tried them, we convicted them, and now we're going to divide them up. I mean, she actually literally pleaded with the judge in Alabama not to do it, and he did it anyway.
Yeah, that's they really have the option. They, practically speaking, I mean, if you're thinking about a judge and these guys have a whole host of escapes from all the places that they were put in, probably would have separated them too.
Well, I mean, if you think about the prisons that they sent them to, I mean, is Lewisburg any more secure than Atlanta, or is Leavenworth any more secure than Atlanta? I mean, yeah, you say you want to put them into different places to separate them, but heck, you could have put one in one area of Atlanta and one in another cell house and one in another one. You could have separated them, but you could have kept them in a place where the family could have at least have access to go visit them. But like I said, when they sent John away, that was pretty much the last time my grandmother ever saw him. Outside of we do have rumors that they did see them before she died, but still, it was just the fact that they separated them is I think it's what really upset my grandmother a lot.
And just one little thing about Leavenworth, for example, they have approximately 1,500 inmates. So, it's obviously a larger prison. So they could have very easily kept them at different parts of the prison if they had chosen to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what happened in Lewisburg?
Go ahead, Mike. You want to tell that one?
No, I think you should tell it. It's your story.
Okay.
Well,
we do know that when John showed up, one of the first things that I think John did at every single prison, including Clarence, was he started planning on how he's going to get out. I believe his sole motivation and Clarence's motivation from the very beginning after the estate trial was that they wanted to be reunited with their girlfriends, Helen and Ruth. And their goal was as soon as they got out, they were leaving the country. I mean, their father told them, if you were able to make it out, don't ever come back to the United States. Leave the country and don't ever come back. And Lewisburg was close enough for Helen to visit John. And we do know that she went and had a visit with him. He even wrote in one of his letters about her visiting him. And undoubtedly, she, either convinced him, don't try this escape that you're doing. He had let her know somehow that he was planning on getting out. I don't know if he was actually asking for her help. Meet me outside and then we'll get in the car and take off. But I do know that he was definitely planning, and somehow somebody found out about it, and that's what got him transferred to the next stop in his career was Leavenworth.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was interesting because when I was going through the book and I was looking at all the pictures, I saw one picture of Helen, probably it looked like it might have been the late 70s, early 80s with the brother Robert, Mr. Mann. And is that correct? She looked like she was probably in her 50s?
Yes, she kept in contact with the family pretty much up until the point that she died. I have a picture of her when she was in her 80s and didn't even look like herself. I mean, she was a very attractive woman when she was in her 20s and 30s. So I can definitely see how John was attracted to her. And
so how did I think you want to ask this
well,
question.
yeah, I mean, what happened? So after they got arrested and obviously all this stuff exploded with Helen, did he write to her? Like, what else happened? Did they ever talk again, or?
Yes.
Well, one thing I just want to throw in real quick before Ken answers that. When they were arrested for the bank robbery, they went to Helen's father. He was in Cincinnati, Ohio area. And they were all arrested, of course, because they were all together, and they were all charged initially, but eventually became known that only John and Clarence and Alfred were aware of the robbery and had planned the robbery. The rest of the family knew nothing about it, or not the family, but Ken's family didn't know anything about it, but also Helen's family didn't know anything about it, or Jeanette either. And so eventually the charges against them were all dropped, even also the father, because he was charged with harboring fugitives and he didn't know why they were there. So only the three were charged and the others were not charged. There was no anger, animosity, problems with the family because they were sort of unwilling complicits in what had happened. So they were still okay with John and Clarence and Alfred because...
Yeah, and that photograph that you sent me, it must have been from the paper. It said 6 arrested in bank robbery. And it has them all lined up in the photograph that you described in one of the podcasts where they're all dressed to the nines, handcuffs, standing on the street corner. And that's like the press photograph of them.
You should have heard the story that my mom told. That you're right. When they broke in or came in and they arrested everybody in the house, including Helen's mom and dad, and you could see them out on the street. They take them down to the local police station and they have them in jail. And until they realize how old Jeanette was, when they found out that she was only 16 years old, I think it really kind of freaked them out, because my mom said that she told them that they quickly got her out of that cell and had her transported back down to her family in Florida. It was something that very few people knew, that how young she was. But like Mike said, no one really kind of knew what had happened outside of the three brothers.
Okay, so he gets kicked out of Lewisburg. Where does he go next?
Well, so after he's caught whatever he was doing in Lewisburg, they don't really describe what he was participating in. They just said he was in an act that was around an escape planning. So they say, okay, well let's ship him to Leavenworth. That was his next step, which that just pretty much defeats the whole purpose that they set out to do in the very beginning, which was to separate these two or these three. And so they go, okay, well let's send him to Leavenworth, and that's when he hooks up back with his brother. And like I said, you know, from
And Alfred, where's Alfred? Alfred's where? Still in Georgia?
Alfred is still in Atlanta. You know, Alfred decided not to take the road of let me try to escape. He took the road of the legal process. He really, which is kind of, to me, I think says a lot about his character. You know, he realized he was in trouble. He thought he could do this the legal way. He didn't want to try to do it the wrong way. And he got a bunch of law books. He studied. He wrote to the ACLU. He did everything that he could possibly do the legal way. And so he pretty much dropped out of the picture at this point. You know, it was then all just John and Clarence. And I can tell you one thing: as soon as John shows up anywhere, when he was in prison, and Clarence, they were already formulating, how can we get out of here? You know, they were looking for some type of an escape route, a plan, anything. And it took them, it really didn't take them that long to come up with the plan. Somehow, you know, working in the kitchen, John notices, hey, you know, we could hide in this bread box and
yeah, no, I mean that's a great story. I want to break that down because initially they weren't working in the kitchen, and they found out that two guys got kicked out of work in the kitchen, and they saw an opening, and then I don't know whether it was John's idea. He came up to him in the yard and to Clarence and said, "I figured out how we can get out." And you know, or vice versa. I can't remember one of them.
It was actually John. John had figured out you know, how to do it, and he reached out to his brother and said, "We need to go and get you know, a job in this kitchen." And John was always looking for that opportunity. He was very smart. He was very calculating. He would look for opportunities that people wouldn't have noticed. It's probably one of the reasons why they say he was actually the mastermind on the Alcatraz escape, that he had already pretty much started laying out the details even before he got there. So yeah, this plan of escaping through the kitchen access with this bread box that they were bringing in was something that John had said, hey, this is a way for us to get out.
Wow. And
well, one of the things that's important to know is that, you know, they would bake the bread in the kitchen, and then they would put them in these big boxes that were on wheels, and then they would take them outside to these trucks in the morning that are waiting for them, and they would take them to other places, other local prisons for bread to feed the prisoners. So that they thought if we hide in the boxes, they're going to transport us themselves off site, and we'll get out later, kind of a thing.
Yeah. And it didn't work out that way, according to what I've read. You know, they got Clarence. It looked like they stuck just Clarence in one of the boxes.
I believe they only had time before they heard someone coming back in. I believe one of the supervisors coming back into the room, and they had already gotten Clarence into his box. And I believe at that point in time, they, you know, at some point in time in an escape, if you lose your opportunity to go, you have to pretty much give up, you know, your seat, so supposedly in the boat. And Clarence was already in, and so it pretty much kind of fell to John to act like nothing was going on. And you know, he was probably going to have to wait for another opportunity. But
yeah, I mean, according to the book, you know, the guard came in, tried to move one of the boxes that he was in, realized that it felt a lot heavier than it normally did.
Yeah, and they could actually hear the breathing in there.
Exactly. And then he made some sort of noise, audible noise, and then he saw the I guess the cardboard cutter.
Yeah, the movement.
And the movement, and then he told him to pop out. It
actually sounds like something out of a Cool Hand Luke show.
It just, like I said, these guys.
Oh my God, so much so. It's Butch Cassidy and Cool Hand Luke.
Yes, most definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's hilarious how they just, we'll just put ourselves in the bread box and try to sneak out that way.
I just thought they'd just go. They're going to get away with it.
But you know, it took them a while. I remember in the book, it just took him a little while to figure that out, because when he first got there and he met up with Clarence, he had done his homework already and realized there's not too many opportunities here. So it took him a while to get to that kitchen idea. And then, yeah, so after that, I think after Clarence's attempt, I think that's what I believe launched him to the Rock at that point. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, but something else to kind of carry forward right before we move on to that piece of it was that one thing I noticed about John and Clarence was, especially John, they would position themselves into jobs that moved them into position to utilize materials like, and we see this clearly play out in Alcatraz. But, like you said, John realizes, hey, we got an opportunity if we can get jobs at the kitchen. I see a path. And so they're always looking for that opportunity. And I remember Whitey Bulger telling me that they were so low key and they pretty much tried to stay out of the limelight that they would fade into, a guard wouldn't even think twice about, oh, they just want to go work in the kitchen, or somebody wants to cut hair. They're not even thinking that these men are calculating every step of this escape. But you're correct. So as soon as they get caught in Leavenworth, John is sent automatically to Alcatraz. His participation, they figure out real
John
quick.
or Clarence first?
No, John went first.
Okay.
Yep. So John goes first, and they pretty much figured out John was participating in this, and so they went ahead and shipped him out. Clarence, though, of course, they had to keep him a little longer because they gave him 2 more years. He was the one that actually was trying to escape. So that actually landed him a little bit, longer there to face the charges and get an additional 2 more years at it.
And then they put him in administrative segregation, basically in the hole for a period of time after that as well.
In Leavenworth, I don't ever remember if they got put in the hole. I would assume they did, because just about any prison, if you're caught or participating in an escape, you pretty much go into the hole.
Well, and that's what happened to White. He wrote in one of his letters, actually several of the letters, he describes it multiple times when he tried to escape the prison before he was sent to Alcatraz. They caught him, of course, and then he was put in the hole for several weeks before they let him out, because they were trying to get information from him. And several months, excuse me. He was there for 3 months.
Yeah, he was there for quite a while.
So yeah, that's sort of standard procedure. You just throw them in a dark place for a while and let them think about it.
Yeah. Well, before we get into John being officially launched onto Alcatraz Island, and in the book, you kind of do a little sidestep and you start talking about Morris and talking about his background and how it's very similar upbringing. Well, in one way it was that where he got in trouble at a very young age. He had a kind of very horrible childhood, but the parallel paths that he criminal wise and getting in trouble wise was very similar to the brothers. So I wanted to talk a little bit about his, and because he plays obviously a big part in when they get to Alcatraz and they all meet up and there along with a bunch of other people.
So for Frank Morris, it's similar in some ways, different in others. Yes, he does have a life of crime, petty criminal stuff growing up as a kid, but his was more based on his mother, who was in her teen years when she got pregnant. The identity of the father is something of a mystery. She identified this one guy as his last name was Morris. That's where Frank gets his last name, because the mother never married this guy. But there's always been was he the real guy or was he not the guy? And she was sort of a kind of a wild child. She grew up in a nice, affluent home, but she just had this very rebellious spirit, and she wanted to go live life and be out there and have fun, and just kind of had a party life. This is, back in the 30s. Frank was born, late 20s, because Morris was born in 26. It's during the flapper age, the jazz age, mm-hmm. And the mother really responded to this, and she gets pregnant, and is not equipped to be a good mother at all, but did feel some responsibility. So she did try to. She went to a women's school to learn a trade, to learn a skill, to get a job. But then she ran away from it for a little bit, and then they brought her back. and she would kind of be with men for a time. They would just kind of use her for a time. And so Frank was put into a lot of foster homes to try to give him a stable environment, to try to have people try to take care of him when he was very young. And so he went to foster home to foster home to foster home. And then the mother would sort of reappear for a time and try to take care of him, but just never really connected with Frank. And when she would show up, he'd get very upset because she was just not a loving person. I don't think she just had the skills, because she left, ran away from home at an early age and never really went back home again. And then it was just, she was sort of in the system as Frank was in the system. And of course, when you have that kind of very unstable environment and your mother has abandoned you essentially, or would just show up for a time and then leave again for, months and years in some cases, you're going to be angry. You're going to be an angry kid, and you're going to start lashing out. You're going to start doing things that are antisocial. And, that led to crimes. And he, like the brothers, he would send to reform schools, to boys' schools. And then later on, as he started, when he was in his teens and 20s, then he started graduating to, higher crimes. And he pulled a couple of bank robberies, and that's what ultimately led him to federal prison. So yeah, he was, but like we also described too, Frank Morris was a very intelligent person. He was very smart. He had an IQ of 133, which was almost Mensa level intelligence.
Yeah.
And, we sort of postulate in the book, what would he have done had he been brought up in a, loving, stable home? He could have achieved great things, but he never had the chance because his life was terrible.
Yeah. Now, and I believe in the book it says that he met Whitey before the brothers did, correct?
Yes. Undoubtedly him and Whitey became pretty close in Atlanta. I don't know if he knew Whitey prior to that. Jim never really kind of mentioned it. He did, speak of Frank Morris very fondly. I mean, he had nicknames for him. I think he even nicknamed him Paco.
Paco. Yeah.
And so, he was very, very good friends with him. In fact, they joked about who was going to reach Alcatraz first from Atlanta when they were both sent. So it's, yeah, him and White were very good friends.
Yeah, so it's that alliance that started there in Atlanta, and then that it would eventually kind of traverse over into Alcatraz. And so was John there before Whitey and Frank?
No, they had actually got there before John. Whitey got to Alcatraz before Frank. Frank showed up, I believe, maybe a month after him. I'd have to go back and actually look at the dates.
Yeah, it was like a month or so.
Yeah, about a month. And then John came in 1960. So he was transferred in 1960 to Alcatraz. And then I believe Clarence came in 61, in January of 61.
January 61.
Yeah, he came just before I was born. I mean, I was born January the 27th of 61. And if I remember right, it was like January the 11th when he showed up at Alcatraz. Somewhere in that time frame.
Crazy. And so, yeah, it's weird how they just all kind of met there. What was fun reading was John's first encounter with the warden on Alcatraz, because he called him in and had like a sit down with him. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I thought it kind of, number one, it gives you an idea of what the warden was like, because according to the reports in the book is that he was probably the least strict warden that they had ever had. Mainly, and they attributed to because he was a heavy drinker and heavy smoker. But just the conversation he had with John was really interesting. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, I would definitely say that John in one of his letters, like I said, he was always plotting and planning what he was going to do when he got to wherever he was at. And one of his letters, he even writes, we brought it up last week, that as he was riding over in the boat, he was like saying the boat's going the wrong direction. You can clearly tell he's already thinking about something. And yeah, I don't know if it was standard practice to actually, talk with the warden. It could have been. I don't know. I do know that John did have a conversation with him. And I don't know if maybe it was the arrogance of this, of Warden Blackwell, because, I mean, he was like, as Mike said earlier, he was warned not to put the two brothers together. And, he pretty much looked at his prison as his domain. And, how dare you send and give me advice about how to run my prison? But,
yeah,
I can almost see him sitting down with John, and John's probably looking out at the bay and thinking, gosh, if I could just make it out to that water,
yeah,
I know how to swim. I'm sure the wheels were turning at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the dialogue's accurate, but I think the warden said something like, "What do you see out there?" He goes, "I see water and freedom," and he says,
yes.
He said that, and the warden says, no one's survived, no one's gotten off the rock. He goes, and so I thought, just the arrogance to say that as soon as you walk in. And you've already gotten, I think he got a letter from the previous prison that was sent to the warden warning him, like you said. So the fact that he just has, doesn't pull any punches, just like he did with Helen's ex-husband, he just kind of says it like it is, and just a lot of confidence there. A lot of confidence, especially going to a place that is considered the worst prison on the planet.
Well, I do know my mom talked so highly about her brother, John, that he was a very likable person. He never met a stranger. You could walk up to him, and in 5 minutes you're chit chatting with him, and you think he's your best friend, and he really is. He would be a great friend to you. So I'm sure that sitting down with Warden, he was probably joking. He was always a jokester, according to my mom. So he, saying to him, well, I see freedom out there. He probably chuckled at it. And I'm sure that the warden just thought, yeah, this is a jokester. He's a character, but he hasn't seen the likes of this place yet.
So what did he do with Helen at this point? I mean, because he had to go to Alcatraz.
Right.
Did he cut it off with her altogether and just said, go live your life? Or what happened? Because
that's an interesting story, because in most of the letters, he's always at least bringing Helen up. Helen kept pursuing him, even in prison. In fact, one of the letters, he said, I think I'm going to have to just tell her, not to write me anymore, because I've got so many years on me, and I've got a long time before I'm ever going to be out. And he started realizing, just like Alfred did with Jeanette. And he was trying to kind of cut it off, but at the same time, he was so in love with her that, she just kept pursuing, and he kept writing, and they almost had this relationship through letters.
Yeah.
But he does say in the letters to basically let him go. He sort of complains to his mother that she just won't let him go, right. Because he's on the other side of the country. He's going to be there for many years, barring an escape attempt, of course. But if that doesn't work, he's going to be there for a long time. So he felt bad that he put her in this terrible situation. And, for your sake, for your life, if you want to have a happy life, let me go and, go live how you want to live, and not include me in it anymore. So he was trying to do the best for her.
And a little twist to the whole plot with Helen, at some point in time, she does divorce her husband that she was married to when her and John took off. And she winds up marrying an FBI agent.
Get out!
No joke. And I know it's wild. Later in life, she marries an FBI agent who I'm not sure he ever worked the case, but yeah, she does wind up marrying him.
Coincidence? I think not.
I don't know.
Well, and the other thing, I think we brought this up last time, was that also in the letters, John talks about Helen had a baby, and the paternity of the baby is in dispute, but she does name the baby John. So Was that her previous husband's baby, or was it John's baby? We don't know.
But you know, you almost kind of think that it's, and we've got a couple of letters where John asked his mom if she would go over. Something must have happened to the baby, that it got sick, because John asked his mom, "Would you please go over and check on Helen and the baby, and make sure that they're okay?" And so he pleaded with them to go over and give her some help. How old this child is, you know, I'm not real sure. I know I have spoken to John, the child, and he doesn't seem to believe that he is. He doesn't really kind of want to talk about it, so I didn't push him. But
well, what year was he born? What year was he born?
Well, you know, and that's kind of it. So that's where it got a little confusing, because he claimed that he was born like in 1957. I think it was 57. But the way that John's letter indicates, when he writes it in like 1961, 60 or 61, you know, he's referring to the boy as a little baby and not a toddler or someone that's a lot older. So I did ask John one time, you know, if I could, like, could I see your ID? And he wouldn't let me see it. So my mom believes he's not really kind of being honest about when he was born, and it's really kind of hard to track it down. So
yeah, well,
unless he does Ancestry.com.
Exactly.
You know, well, I've actually put Helen in our Ancestry.com that we have with John, and but I can't get anything to come up on her. So undoubtedly, he's never put anything in.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. So that's that jettison. So Helen was still contacting him despite the fact that he wanted her to kind of go on and have a life of her own, knowing that, you know, he's going to be locked up, or if he does get out, he's going to have to go somewhere else. And so now, so John's hits the rock first. Whitey and Frank Morris are there. When does Clarence show up?
So Clarence shows up.
Or is there anything interesting before Clarence shows up? I mean, what?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
So, like I said, John is like, he is calculating from the very beginning. And I do know that Whitey told me the very first time he ever walked out onto the yard, he undoubtedly must have been sitting with Frank Morris at this time. And he says, "Hey, you know, that guy reminds me of Steve McQueen." Well, Frank Morris already knew John England and Clarence from other prisons. They had, like I said, they had spent time well before they got to this point in their life in a Florida state prison called Rayford. So whenever John walks across the yard, of course, with Frank Morris and Jim Bolger, very good friends, they're sitting out on the steps. John comes up to them, and that's when they pretty much kind of start, you know, chatting about it. According to Wes's story, it wasn't too long after John got there that Wes came to him and was telling him, you know, about what he saw, and he said in his deposition or his testimony to the FBI, John was already aware of this access and was already calculating how they might use it for their benefit. So I can just imagine that a lot of the pre-planning type stuff in John's mind was already there even before Clarence shows up. And as soon as Clarence shows up, you know, John's working in the kitchen. That would probably have been their very first meeting, which is what we put into the book. And John's already letting him know, hey, brother, I've already been thinking about what we're going to do.
And so how long was John there before Clarence showed up?
I'd have to look at my date.
Was it like a few months? Was it like
probably,
a year?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's definitely a few months. John got there, I believe, like in September or October of 1960. I believe it was around that time frame. And then Clarence came in January of 61, the beginning of 61. So yeah, it was definitely a few months. John had already settled in. He already had a job. He was, he was working in the kitchen at that time. And I actually believe he's already transferred at least once in his cell before Clarence even gets there.
Yeah. Mike, were you looking something up?
Yeah, I'm looking up when he arrived. I'm still looking.
Well, you can look at their mugshots and tell.
What a cast!
John's mugshot has a date on it.
Yeah.
I mean, what a cast of characters. What are the odds of Whitey Bulger, Frank Morris, John, and Clarence all ending up at the same place?
And then Mickey Cohen.
Cohen. Like, what are the chances of that happening? I mean, it's just crazy.
Well, and then of course, Alan West, even though he's to me, I think he has really a lesser role in it, but they're all previous inmates at other prisons. It's not like, that's one of the things I always found so funny about the Alcatraz movie, The Escape from Alcatraz, was it portrays them as though Frank Morris meets the Anglin brothers and Alan West for the first time and sitting in the dining hall at the table, which is far from the truth.
Okay, so I got the information here. So John arrived October 24th, 1960.
Totally. Right.
And he started working in the kitchen a couple of weeks later on November 10th. And then Clarence, he showed up in January 16 of 61. So about 2.5 months later. And then he starts working in the kitchen a week later. So yeah, they're very quickly working together in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And there again, you've got the letter that's coming from Leavenworth to Warden Blackwell, warning him, do not put these two men together. and not only does he eventually at some point in time house them side by side, but he's allowing them to work in the same area, the kitchen and other areas. And it's just kind of comical that, he didn't heed these warnings. He undoubtedly really did not believe that Alcatraz was a place that anyone could escape from.
Also, some of the wardens we've ever met, you tell them to do something, they'll do the opposite.
Yeah.
I can believe that.
Like, don't tell me what to do in my prison.
Exactly.
That's the thing. It's like,
I'm still amazed that it was like just 250 inmates. That just seems like,
yeah.
I mean, when you look at it, I mean, it does. I mean, I've been on the island. I've been, we've walked around. It is small. It's not as big as, a lot of people think it is. And it's very close. I mean, the cell blocks are just, they're tiered up high, but they're not spread out. And but just the fact that there's 250, and then you have 4 guys or like 5 guys who all have a criminal prior relationship with each other. I mean, Frank with Whitey just behind bars, but you have the brothers with Mickey Cohen where they were actively, working with them. It's such a kind of powder keg of criminal minds all in one place. It just like was the perfect storm for something like this to happen.
It was the who's of criminals.
Yeah.
So when did Mickey, was Mickey there when they got there already, or did they?
No.
So he
actually
showed up on July 28, 61. So about 6 months later.
Yeah. And that to me is like, that is so interesting because when he shows up, at this time, John not only was working in the kitchen, I believe at some point in time, he had transferred over to the clothing department or clothing area. And this is where they would, if you had a damaged shirt or, dirty, whatever, you would bring it in and they would exchange it for new socks, new pants, whatever. And so they were in charge of overseeing this. And Mickey Cohen shows up, and one of his first jobs, in fact, his only job, is he goes to the clothing room. So now John and Mickey Cohen are in the exact same building together working. And that to me is just amazing because here they are with previous, business ties that they were trying to form together. And now they're working together in the same department.
Yeah. What were those? Did you know anything about the conversations those guys had and what they talked about? And, and obviously Mickey was in on the escape plan and probably, more than likely helped them with the boats and stuff. But what were those? I mean, it's like, it just seems like it's such a brain trust and what was going on. I can only imagine what those conversations are like.
Well, so of course no one was there with a recorder. You wish you were a fly on the wall, you could hear it, but you kind of piece together different people that kind of paint this picture of what was occurring. So as soon as Mickey Cohen gets there and he's in the clothing room, because he's only there for a short period of time, believe it or not, his lawyer was already kind of working, trying to get him out on a bond while they appealed his case. And so it was probably already kind of well known. In fact, it was well known that Mickey was pursuing this avenue. But in 1992, whenever go back, let's jump ahead to whenever Fred Breezy is meeting with the Angling family. On that recording, my Uncle Man says something amazing. Somebody asked about, well, how in the world would, if they had help, how in the world would they have gotten, the word out, for someone to help them? And my Uncle Man said, oh, well, all they had to do was find someone who was going to leave and they could have just transported the information out. I was like, wait a minute, that's exactly what Mickey Cohen did. Here he was about to get out. He's working with John. And whenever he is bonded out, so he gets this unbelievable person to sign his bond, and everyone knows he's fixing to leave the island. And so Whitey Bulger said that they all went to him and told Mickey, said, listen, we just like we said, you're about to get out. You've got the perfect opportunity. There is no such thing as ankle monitoring at that point in time.
Yeah.
They have no way of tracking them when they leave. Not really, have someone tell you, but you know how easy that could be shook off. He could have easily escaped the country. In fact, they told him, flee to Brazil, marry a local Brazilian woman, have children, and you can never be brought back. They cannot extradite you out of Brazil back to the United States. And you can live out your life and have a nice, easy life. Mm-hmm. And so everybody thought, okay, this is what he's going to probably do. But he does just the opposite. He comes back. 6 months later, he comes back. And what is really amazing is if you listen to Wes, if you go and you read that detailed interview that he gave with the FBI, they had actually already built a raft, the very first one, and it was already kind of there, and that's what they were going to use. Well, Mickey comes back, and in that short time frame, they build another raft. Between the time Mickey shows up and the time that they escape, they actually construct another raft. And you go, well, why would they need another raft if they already had one? Because Mickey had came to them and said, hey, I've got set up a boat to pick y'all up. All you need to do is get there. And that's when the plan actually changed. Because I do believe that from the very beginning, it was probably going to be that we're going to take that raft, the original raft, and then we're going to go to Angel Island. Mm-hmm. And that's what Wes knew. Wes knew that story. And that's what Wes was telling everyone in Alcatraz, as he was boasting about being a part of this plan. And they eventually clamped down on him, said, okay, you can't go out into the yard anymore by yourself. And because they didn't trust him. Yeah. And I believe that whenever Mickey came back and told John, because when he comes back, he goes directly back into the clothing room with John. Now, all of a sudden, you've got him. He left. He's gone for 6 months. He comes back. He delivers whatever information, news that he needs to deliver to John. John says, okay, we need a new boat. The one that we had before is not going to work. And what's interesting is because they actually built this next one, they put an eye at the front of it, which is where they loop that cord through, which is what towed them behind that boat. So all of this was constructed, and Wes didn't really know anything about it. Because when you listen to him give that testimony to the FBI, he was really out of the dark on a lot of the second half of this plan.
Well, he inadvertently gave them a good disinformation campaign, you know?
Well, according to Jim, because I asked Jim that question. I asked him because everybody in Alcatraz was, you know, pulling for the brothers, the trio.
Jim meaning Whitey.
Jim, Whitey boys. I'm gonna say Jim. I'll start saying Whitey.
Yeah, just say
Whitey said they were all. Everybody was pulling for these three, and I asked him. I said, "Well, let me ask you something." So I read the art. You know, I read the interview where Wes gave to the FBI. I said he pretty much gave them away if they had gone that direction. I said, what would have happened to him if everybody knew what he did? And Jim said he would not have survived 5 seconds in the yard. He said he told them what we told him to tell him. So take that how you want to take it.
They call that treating him like they call that treating him like a mushroom. Feed him shit and keep him in the dark.
Exactly right. You're exactly right. And you know, when you read the FBI, one of the things that caught my attention in that interview that they did with him, at the very end, undoubtedly one of the FBI agents questioned him about why did he take his clothes? Because when you listen to the interview that he gives, this is how he said it. When he eventually broke out of the back of his cell, he got dressed, got his clothes on because it was going to be cold. He got up onto the top of the cell house. He was about to go through the vent, and he realized, hey, I can't go through the vent with my clothes on. So he takes his clothes off, and he goes through the vent, pulls his clothes up, gets redressed on top of the cell, on top of the building. He goes over, he looks over to the side, and he notices that everybody's gone. So he's like, okay, I've been left behind. So he goes back. He does the reverse, takes his clothes off, goes back down the shaft, puts his clothes on, goes back into his cell, and then sits there. And according to some people, he was crying. Well, the FBI asked him about the clothes because his comment to them was, I didn't know of any other clothes that we had. Because all of the other inmates, John, Clarence, and Frank Morris, all left their clothes behind. All of their clothes is still in their cells. They had other clothes to put on, and he didn't know about that.
And in the letters that Whitey wrote, because he had a scuba diving background, he understood how water worked and hyperthermia. And he told them, you know, well, he also prepared them for the cold water. You know, because everyone makes a big deal about Alcatraz having the hot showers, which for the regular inmates, that was great. You got a hot shower. Well, that was intentional on their part so that they wouldn't get acclimatized to the cold water and not attempting to try to swim their way to freedom. Well, Whitey does two things to help them. The first one was he tells them that in your cells, you have your sink and the toilet, and they have just cold water. They don't have hot waters in their cells. So he tells them to get the towels that they had, to dampen the towels and to lay them on them, take off all their clothes, lay the towels on them, and then lay on the cement floor to get used to the cold. And the second thing that he told them was to get kind of like long johns and use glue on the wrists and on the ankles to kind of make it more of a binding kind of a hold, so that you have this air pocket, you know, between your skin and the wetsuit, as it were. To better protect them against the cold. And so those are the other clothes that Ken was referring to that Whitey had told them to create as a buffer against the cold water. So he did two things to help them that way.
And so, you know, to me, that's why I say Wes was never involved in the second escape, or the second part of the escape, was because he didn't know about this clothes. And that's what caught, I believe, the FBI. They questioned him like, you know, well, why did you take your clothes? Because everybody else left theirs behind. And so he was like, well, I didn't know of any other clothes. So that clearly is an indication right there that he was not part of the plan.
He was just the useful idiot.
Yes.
Well, the other thing that happens too is, you know, because they escape on June 11th. And again, in the FBI report, Alan West says that he stopped digging the back of his cell in April. He stops. And the question is, why would he stop digging when the whole purpose of trying to get out was to make the hole big enough for you to get out? Right. And again, in Whitey's letter, I mean, these letters proven valuable. All this information he provides, nobody has, because he was an eyewitness. He was there. He was a part of the plan. He wasn't a part of the escape, but he was a part of the plan to help them escape. And one of the things Ken kind of referenced was, because Alan had kind of a big mouth. He was kind of a hothead. He was unpredictable. You didn't know quite what he was going to do. When he was talking to other inmates about the escape plan, Frank Morris finds out, and he's very angry with West because, as we've talked about in a previous episode, you don't know who the snitches are in the prison. The guards kept that information very secret because if it was found out somebody was a snitch, like Ken said, you're going to be killed. So you didn't take any chances of saying anything important to anybody you didn't know very well or you couldn't trust. Well, West is talking to people, and so Morris basically tells them, from now on, when we go to eat, you sit with us. When we go into the exercise yard, you stay with us. And he had gotten a knife, which he had sharpened, and he kept with him at all times. And he told, somehow Whitey knew this, that if anything happens, if we ever get caught, either in the prison or outside the prison, if we get caught, the first thing he was going to do was kill Alan West. He told him that. He says, I will kill you if we get caught. So we think that was the reason that West stopped digging his cell, because he was scared of Morris. And so he starts to have a change of heart about his participation in the escape. And it's also probably at that time, like Ken said, when Cohen comes back, when they alter the plan, they still leave West with the understanding of this is the plan, but it's the old plan. And now they've adjusted it and they don't tell him.
Right. Well, and two, one of the things that, to kind of back up that story of the butcher knife that Morris had, and he had planned to do West End, was in the, and I know this because Wes actually gave 2 interviews with the FBI. There are 2 statements that he makes. Both of them are very similar. I mean, he didn't leave a lot out, but in his second interview that he gave, that's in the files, I believe they asked him about weapons. Did they have any weapons? And he said, the only thing that I'm pretty sure that they had was a knife, a butcher knife. And so he knew about the knife. And the way that he knew about that knife, because him and John were very good friends. I don't know, how many prisons they spent together in Florida, but they were friends. And I don't believe that John would have allowed that to occur. I believe it's John who went, either John, Clarence, or both of them went to Alan West and said, listen, you might want to rethink about going with us, because Frank has got got no good for you if you go and anything goes wrong. And that's the reason why I've always believed Wes purposely did not go. And I'm not even sure he even made it to the top of the roof. I mean, this is his account of what happened. It might have been the story he told, but like I said, the way he told the story about him getting dressed, going out, was that's what caught the FBI, because they were like, wait a minute, nobody else got dressed. Why did you take your clothes?
Yeah.
And you almost want to ask too, if there were 2 boats up there, if there were 2 rafts and they took one, why didn't he just grab the other raft? If he wanted to get out so bad, why didn't he grab the other raft?
Good point.
I mean, there was a head that he could put in the cell. It was behind his vent. He had a life vest. They found another one up on top. So he had a life vest. He actually had another boat, but for some reason I think he chickened out.
I was just going to say that.
That's what I was going to say too. It sounded like he got scared.
I mean, of course, he wanted to make them paint the story as that, he was a part of the escape and he just couldn't get out. by God,
Yep.
something happened that night and I just couldn't get out, you know.
Yeah, he wasn't.
And Whitey was of the belief that he also chickened out, that he was trying to justify it afterwards, and the inmates, they had no respect for him because he was in the inner circle and he was still there in the morning, and so they said, yeah, you chickened out, and you know his stock went way down after that.
I'm sure it did. All right, well, this is a good place to end it, and I think we're getting into the real nitty gritty now that we're on the rock and all the relationships there and everything that happened there. Once again, it's like I said, there's stuff that I'm reading the book and stuff you guys are talking about that aren't in the book. So it's like I don't know how much you guys had to cut out in order to get it down to the piece, but there's a lot of information here.
Yeah, that was quite a bit we had to kind of cut out. So
yeah. But we'll continue this next week with Ken and Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys, and we'll talk to you next week.